German immigrants have been migrating to Scotland for over 300 years for a variety of reasons. For some, this immigration was caused by economic hardships, religious persecutions, crop failures and the avoidance of war and military service. In some cases, government entities encouraged poor citizens to emigrate, and by the late 19th century immigration had become more affordable while political and economic problems still continued in the country. At the time, Germany was a very backward rural country with very little work, much like Ireland. Germany once had a strong relationship with Britain because during the early 19th century, 1814 to 1837, the House of Hanover in the northern part of Germany shared the same king with Britain. Most of the ethnic Germans came from the Hanover area, but others came from the southwestern parts such as the Rhineland and Baden and settled mostly in the small town of Greenock in Inverclyde.
Germany back at that time was very rural. Most of the work was farm work, and it was quite a poor part of Europe at the time. It suffered from a massive cholera outbreak at that time, and it also had potato blight. It also had very, very strong links with Britain at that time. The electors of Hanover, who were essentially the royal family for that part of Germany, were also the British royal family at that time. The House of Hanover was the ruling family at that time, so there was strong links. There had been a lot of Germans serving in the British Armed Forces for 300 years previous to that. But like most immigrants, they came looking for employment, and the opportunities were there because it was Germans who ran the sugar refinery in Britain at that time. So they were essentially bringing their own workers, again as you would see today with immigration.
Many people who are researching their family histories are finding out that they came from German backgrounds. Ross Alfeld has found out his ancestors came to Greenock and brought with them the industry of sugar refining.
My ancestors came from a village called Lemwerder, which is just a few miles outside Bremen in northern Germany, and they emigrated here in 1860 to Greenock, and they came initially to work in the sugar refinery business.
Sugar refining was an industry brought to Greenock and the surrounding area by the Germans. Around 14 large refineries opened and operated in the district in the 1870s. A man named Mark Kuhl was a German immigrant who came over to live in Greenock in 1765, where he set up the first sugar refinery in the area the same year, on the street which was appropriately named Sugar House Lane.
Mark Kuhl developed sugar refining in Germany, along with a guy called Lear Vrede, and they opened the first sugar warehouses at Sugar House Lane in Greenock, and a couple of the other refineries, and just brought that expertise. And again, naturally with that, they decided to bring over their own workers. We think that the maximum ethnic Germans peaked probably around about 1900, and there might have been up to 1,000, maybe 1,200 ethnic Germans in Inverclyde at that time.
By the end of the 19th century, there were 14 refineries in operation. This created many job opportunities and many immigrants arrived in Scotland in search of employment. Thus, the small German community began to grow in numbers as well as a small Irish population. However, the work in the sugar refineries was hot, exhausting and dangerous. Workers were expendable and continually exposed to the risks from boiling sugar, scorching containers, scalding steam, heavy objects, poor building design and of course, fire.
As far as we know, it was pretty bad work, really difficult and quite dangerous. So essentially the sugar refineries were often mostly full of Germans, and there was a lot of Irish people working in the sugar warehouses because it was pretty low paid and pretty difficult work, and a lot of the good jobs are gone. It was essentially an immigrant's job, especially around Sugar House Lane, around the warehouses.
As the Germans had been considered masters of the sugar trade, they had built most of the warehouses in Greenock, and naturally, these German engineers and bosses brought their own workers to Britain from rural North Germany in search of work.
Germans were described as being masters of sugar baking, and it was almost kind of considered like a sort of hidden art, if you like. And as far as we know, that skill of being sugar refinery and working in that industry became strongly associated with Germans. The links were so strong between the two countries that nobody really thought much of the fact that there was Germans running these warehouses and bringing over their own workers,
The German community in Greenock seemed to integrate very quickly, with marriages to locals and expanding families, creating a mix in cultures. And with employment being offered in the sugar industry and the shipyards, soon the small population grew with more and more immigrants arriving. Census records show that around 20 or so Germans were living in the Inverclyde area in 1881, yet by 1891 this amount had grown to nearer 1,000.
Integration wasn't a massive problem. I mean, the industry was the same, the trades were the same. You know, the people were people, and that's probably the main. You know, the thing that's it's interesting about it now that even though things departed between the two countries and the relationship kind of broke down, it's a reminder that, you know, people will get on regardless of their background. You know, that's the kind of main thing. But essentially they all kind of married and settled in very quick. It seems to be, from what I can see, as this is brought down to working class people essentially have more in common, and, you know, regardless of ethnic background and things like that. But there's a very brief period where you could say, yeah, there's an ethnic community living almost isolated, and that they're always around the sugar industry.
During the Second World War, German families that were already living here had to stand in front of a board hoping to be exempt from internment. Describing them as possible enemy aliens, the persons had to be tried and the government would decide whether or not to imprison them. Various internment camps were in effect all over Britain during the war, particularly for Italians and Germans living in the UK, as the British were afraid that they were enemy spies or traitors who were posing as refugees.
Certainly I know a few cases of people interred in the First World War. It really depended on what they classed you. By that time, my great-grandfather who was grown up, and the way out of it was to join up and prove your loyalty. It looks to me like people with German second names in Gourock and Greenock essentially joined up, changed their name, or went on to America, or just you know, would lie low for a long time, even to the point where, you know, maybe 8 years later then people started getting interested in their family tree again. But things changed very quickly, you know.
There were even cases of people losing their jobs because they had foreign ancestors. This was an argument for removing the British royal family, as their ancestors had originally come from Germany. George V changed the name of the royal family from Sachsen-Coburg-Gotha to Windsor as a result of an anti-German feeling during the First World War.
Germans seemed to either be designated as essential labour or asked to join up. It was a difficult thing to prove because, as I say, a lot of people could just say, well, you know, I'm Dutch, or I'm Danish, or I'm Norwegian, or I'm actually Swedish, or I was born in Poland. Because, you know, essentially, who was German, who wasn't? You're talking about people whose forebears immigrated in the middle of the 19th century. So it's a long time to get to 1910. But probably the most obvious thing to do is to do what the House of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha done and change their name to Windsor. I mean, essentially, the Queen today's second name is Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. She just changed her name, as they had to do. They did it overnight. The House of Battenberg became the Mountbattens. They all had to do that, and so did plenty of people here. I think if you had time, you'll find plenty of Smiths that were Schmidts and Millers that were Mullers. You know, if people wanted to do that.
Caroline Lyle began to search her family tree out of curiosity as to where her family on her mother's side came from. For her mother, it was love, not war, that made her emigrate to Scotland. She met her soldier husband in her hometown of Gerresheim during the Second World War and followed him home to Port Glasgow in 1948, where she started her new life.
They met after the war. My dad was a soldier stationed near my mum, and that's how they met, and she came over in 1948 and they were married.
Did your mum work?
When she came over here, she got a job in the mill in Port Glasgow as a bleacher. There was a German man who was the manager, the supervisor in the bleaching room. I don't know if that's why she got the job, but that's where she started off working. I loved my mum being German. I loved learning a different language. Well, it was normal to me. I liked all the things that went with that, with my mum being German, but the downside was I was called a Jerry and a Nazi right through my school life until about 5th year, I think. I still got that, you know. It did bother me sometimes when I was younger, but as I got older I just thought, whatever, you know. I didn't mind the Jerry, but I hated the Nazi bit, you know. It seemed a bit more extreme.
Yeah.
And There's some people painted swastikas outside our front door and, you know, gave us a hard time. Yeah. But when my mum first came over here, she didn't get a hard time. That's the time you would have expected it, you know, just after the war when feelings would still be running high, but they were very, very welcoming, and I think she was seen as a bit of a novelty, you know, the wee German woman in the port, but it was in the 60s when I was born that my brother and sister both got it as well, and sadly 2 of my children were called a Nazi in Nigeria as well.
You mentioned before the Schoenstatt sisters. Who are they and what do they do?
The Schoenstatt sisters were sent here to minister to German war brides, basically. They were very good to my mum in helping her to settle in and inviting her. They had mass in German and they would send her German calendars and little German treats and things like that, you know, and they would come and visit and see how she was getting on with coping with learning the language as well. I think they were here to help. But my mum hardly spoke any English when she came here. My dad hardly spoke any German. I don't know how they got on, you know. But
Love.
well, indeed. It's blind, eh? But she just had to learn, flung in at the deep end. But she still says, home is Germany. I'm going home.
What was your mum's life like before she came here?
My mum talked a lot about her life, you know. She was called up at 18. She was in the army, the Air Force. She was a plotter. You know the women you see with the headsets and they're shoving wee planes about and measuring where the planes are? That's what my mum did. And if it hadn't have been wartime, I think she would have enjoyed the army. You know, she quite liked certain aspects of it, but the fact that it was war obviously was a different story, you know. But just before the Americans advanced, her commanding officer said to them, ditch your uniforms, put your civic clothes on and get out of here. Go, because we're going to be overtaken and you don't want to be captured as a soldier. So just go. And it took her, I think, 4 days to walk home. And it was quite a horrific journey for her. Certainly a lot of different things happened, you know.
So war life was really bad then?
Well, parts of it were. My grandfather, my Uppa as we call him, he was communist and he was sent to concentration camp for a number of years. And when he came home, he said, you will see and hear things that you will not believe were possibly happening under your nose in Germany, because propaganda was telling them this is what the British are doing to us, when it was actually the Nazis were doing to their own and to the Jews, you know. She's been a British citizen since 1948, but she never ever held dual nationality. No. I think it might have given her problems at that time. I don't think it would now, but I think it would have then. Yeah. So it was easier to become a British citizen. So it had 3 weeks. When she came here, she had 3 weeks to make up her mind. Did she want to stay or did she want to go? They would have paid for her to go back, but if she stayed longer than that, she was on her own, you know. But I loved having a German mother. I hated the name calling, but I loved it, being a bit different.
Modern immigration is currently in effect and Germans are still choosing Greenock and the surrounding area as a place to settle. And now, with the decline of the sugar industry and the development of new and varied job prospects, employment is still a huge factor for all immigrants moving to Scotland.
And I guess somebody would immigrate here now if there's a link or a connection or there's an industry.
Hi, my name is Karen and I'm from Germany, and I came over 5 years ago, and the reason was that I read an article in the paper that a lot of people from Berlin in Germany come to Ireland and Scotland to work. And I didn't have a steady job, I was self-employed. So yeah, I was looking for a job, and the reason why I came to Scotland, I was always a great Ireland fan. And then 15 years ago now, I've been to Scotland just once for 10 days. And from that moment on, I kept saying, if I can ever work and live in Scotland, I'm going to do it. And then I just did it. And came over 5 years ago, super happy. And I love it, and I don't know why. And all my friends were laughing, saying, you really are moving to Scotland now? And I was like, I don't know. I found a job. So, and when I came over, I still had my whole flat in Germany all put back in boxes and in the cellar of friends of mine, because I didn't know if I would maybe miss it so much, Germany, come back after 3 months or something. And I arrived here and arrived in Largs. That's where IBM had booked back and breakfast for us. And I woke up the next morning and I walked down to the water and I looked around and I was like, right. And that was it, really. I just love the landscape, and there's so much water, and love the language, the music, the people, the humour. Just love it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the first year, actually, I was dead scared. That's Scottish, isn't it? I was dead scared. That I can't manage, that maybe I fall sick or something, I don't have my family here and I have to go back. I was terrified. But now I'm fine, and now I'm going to stay. I want to stay.
So, for some Germans, Scotland was and still is a fresh start, whether they come for employment, love, leisure, or simply a new beginning. With them, they bring their culture and traditions as well as adapting to our own. They have their heritage and hopefully will pass it on to future generations so we can all understand who and where we came from. And this is what the Identity Project does. Every family has roots. Uncover yours.